Hello and welcome to the Summer Heat and Agriculture NI app, produced as part of the Once Upon a Time in a Heatwave project run between Climate Northern Ireland and the University of Bristol. This app you'll have found online. Hopefully when you've just logged in you've found this landing page with the image. You should be able to see a menu down the side, and I'm going to talk you through some of the features of the app, why you might use it, how you might interact with it, and how it might be useful to you in the future. I'm going to be going through each of these tabs individually. If you can't see these tabs, look for this little button at the top with the three lines. So if you press that, that'll make the menu disappear or reappear. So if you can't see what I'm talking about, make sure you click on that button and you should be able to go through the different tabs that we've got. So the point of this app is to explore the impact specifically of summer heat waves, which we've seen a few major summer heat waves in recent years in Northern Ireland, and this app is going to explain some of the impacts to agriculture as a result of these weather events. So the first tab we're going to go to here is the recent heat waves tab. So if you click on that, it'll bring up this new page. There's basically just some information here about some of the recent heat waves that have occurred in Northern Ireland. So the two biggest ones in recent years were 2018 and 2021. Of course, one or two hot summers doesn't mean that the climate is changing. However, with general warming trends in a changing climate, we do expect summer heat extremes to become more extreme, and extremes like we've just seen will become more common, even somewhere like Northern Ireland, which is generally quite cool and damp. So this is just a bit of a recap from online media sources as to what happened during recent heat waves. So you can choose between which year you want to look at, 2018 or 2021, and as well as that you can then select a month of the year to show how the weather changed in the build up to the event, different say news articles and things say from the Met Office as well, and a bit of information about the temperature and precipitation and other weather factors that were changing throughout those summers. So that is simply just a bit of a recap on what happened, and then from there what we can do is we can go into some of the other tabs that are in the app and start to look at how these heat waves impacted on agriculture. So first of all, we will go to the grass growth tab. So in the grass growth tab here, what we can see is a graph which is produced. This is taking data from an organisation called AgriSearch. They produce this Grass Check NI product, which includes a forecast, usually through the growing season, but it also then provides historic observations of different grass growth rates from their sites across Northern Ireland, which are involved in their network. And what we can see on this graph is months of the year going along the bottom, and then the yield of grass that is on average across all of the Grass Check NI sites. And there's three lines have been plotted here. So these are marked with the different colours. I'll start first of all actually with the average. So this is shown by the black line with a bit of an uncertainty bar around it. This is saying what the typical grass growth you might expect in a given summer would be based upon this Grass Check NI data. So we see that there's a big peak early in the spring and early summer through to about June. Generally it sort of dips down a bit. There's another slight rise usually in August before it starts to decline as we enter the autumn time. Now if we contrast what we would expect in a typical year, this black smooth line going through the blue dots, with what actually we saw occurring in 2018 and 2021, which were the years that we've just looked at in the recent heat waves tab, we can see that, well, some of the years, 2018 grew very well in the springtime. 2021, maybe there was a bit of a slower spring, but it still hit a good peak by about mid-June. However, once those heat waves got really into full swing, as we entered into July, there's a big drop in the grass growth compared to what would normally be expected. And this graph is interactive. If you want to learn more about by how much the 2018 or 2021 grass growth dropped compared to the average, you can click on a point and it'll bring you up some values there. So you can see, for example, if we look at 2018, actually it was 25% above what you might expect in mid-May, but by mid-July, if we click on the point, it is about 61% below the long-term average. So this is some of the impacts that we've started to see from these major heat waves that have happened in Northern Ireland. Of course, there's a few important caveats to that. This is just based upon the GrassCheck NI data and their sites, which, it does not represent every farm and every area of Northern Ireland. So particularly this decrease in grass growth was seen in eastern parts of Northern Ireland. Parts of the west, actually potentially saw very good years because they still had plenty of moisture. So this isn't it isn't specifically just about heat. Dryness and the availability of precipitation is also is very important here, but it just starts to show some of the impacts that we're starting to see in Northern Ireland as a result of this extreme heat. If we then go further down in the page here, there's some advice on what can be done to reduce the impacts of low grass growth. In certain cases, if this is just a one-off event, supplementary feeding for livestock can be possible. But if we expect this to become more regular or more of a persistent problem in the future, perhaps other methods such as diversifying the sward or different grazing strategies might be helpful. There's some information there you can read up about multi-species swards which have been tried out or are being trialled in County Down. Again, this is work that Ag Research as well as AFB and the National Trust are looking into. So potentially that is of interest. There's going to be complications there that it's going to require a different sort of management strategy compared to what traditionally might be done with perennial ryegrass, but it does offer a solution to parts of the country which are going to be persistently drier and having to cope with moisture limitations in the future. If we go back up the top then to some of our other tabs that we've got, this is just really showing what has happened in the past few years. We can then start to think about what are going to happen with future heat waves, or what might happen, might be likely to happen. So if we click on this future heat waves tab, we will get a map generated which shows the temperatures that we might expect during a heat wave that is as extreme as what we saw in 2018. So 2018, roughly, the peak of that heat wave was sort of the hottest temperature we'd seen in about 10 years. So this map is created using different climate model projections from the UK Met Office. It's part of their UK Climate Projections 2018 product. So these projections cover the whole of the UK, and what I've done here is pull out the data specifically for Northern Ireland. I've then looked at an event which is of a similar magnitude to the 2018 event, but at different levels of global warming in the future. So this might be of interest because you may have heard, say in the news or whatever, conversations about these global climate change targets that were discussed, say at COP26 or COP27. So there's an ambition to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures, or at the very least 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. But there is always a possibility that we don't hit those targets and the world might warm by more. So what this map allows you to do is look at, in a 1.5 degree warmer world, how will a 2018 style heat wave compare to what we've seen in recent years. So across Northern Ireland, this is what the map is showing by default. We can see that if the world were 1.5 degrees warmer than pre-industrial, a 2018 sort of event, so to speak, would be about 1 degree hotter than it is currently. If we then pull the slider across, we can go to a 2 degree warmer world, and we can see in a 2 degree warmer world, actually the likelihood of, or the extremity of such an event has increased. So a 2018 style event would be about 2 to 2.5 degrees hotter, and if we slide it all the way up to a 3 degree warmer world, a 2018 style event would be 4 to 5 degrees hotter than it is currently, or was experienced in 2018. You can see there's some spatial variability across Northern Ireland, so particularly in the west, we see slightly higher projected temperatures than we see, say, in the northeast and along coastal areas. So there is a wee bit of variability there. If you want to explore this further, you can download. You click on this, it'll generate a little download thing for you there, and you can save that to your computer. One thing as well I'd like to note, just for reference, although this starts at 1.5 degrees, this is comparing to what we've recently experienced, and the world is currently already about 1 degree hotter than pre-industrial temperatures. So this is saying basically a half degree further global rise, 1 degree further global rise, and finally 2 degree further global rise on top of what we've already experienced. You can then go further down on this page and dig a little bit into more detail about the area where you live. So there's an option here to type in your postcode, and this will generate a graph to show how extreme and the typical annual maximum temperature will be for your area. So you can pick any postcode. For example, let's go for the Climate NI postcode. So this should, if you've typed in the correct postcode, it should bring up the area that you're in, and it shows how the postcode that you've typed in red, compares to the Northern Irish average. So again, this is showing these different levels of warming. We've got the past, which is the most recent 30 years. We've then got 1.5, 2 degrees and 3 degrees of global warming, and it is showing with the central dot what the average maximum summer temperature is each year in these model simulations. The coloured shading around each line shows the spread of uncertainty in the climate models. As this is based on a group of 12 climate models, so some of them will be slightly hotter, some of them will be slightly colder than others. So this is showing the sort of variability. And what we can see here, this is the temperature going up on this axis, and then the warming scenarios here. For the recent past, typically the hottest temperatures and this is over quite a large area, not specifically at the Climate NI office, but typically the maximum temperatures are 21 to 22 degrees, but by the end, if we were to have 3 degrees of warming, that would rise to say 24 to 25 degrees. So we're talking about a 3 degree increase or so there. And in comparison, we can see that actually that area of Belfast doesn't warm as much as the Northern Irish average, shown in blue, which is in pretty good agreement with what we see on the map. So Belfast isn't warming as much as, say, the average of Northern Ireland over this whole area. So that is just some of the ways you can explore and pull out some useful numbers potentially for the area that you live in, and get an idea about how much extra warming we might expect to occur. If we want to go one step further and go beyond just thinking about how hot will it get, we might want to think about what might the impacts of these future heat extremes be. Of course, we've already talked about grass growth, and if these extra hot warm events in the future coincide with dry conditions, then we would expect to see decreasing grass growth, which is similar to what we've seen in the past. But there's some other things we can look at, and these are just some examples. This is not meant to be exhaustive by any means. It's just what data was available for us to include in this app. But first of all, we can look at heat stress in dairy cattle if we click on this tab. So dairy cattle can be sensitive both to high temperature but also to high humidity. Various different studies have looked at this around the world for the UK. The methods which are used here are not different, say, to those global studies, just that we've used the same UK climate projections to focus specifically on Northern Ireland. So again, there's some options here to dig into a bit of spatial detail. So there's two plots shown, which by default show the average for Northern Ireland. Again, we've got these different levels of global warming, past 1.5, 2 and 3 degrees above pre-industrial. And then The left-hand plot here shows the number of days per year where we would expect cattle might be heat stressed due to a combination of temperature and humidity. This is the left-hand plot. And the second plot goes one step further to show what impact that would actually potentially have in terms of milk yield loss as a result of these heat stress days. So as we can see, say for the Northern Ireland average, typically heat stress is not an issue in Northern Ireland. It's a pretty cool place, let's be honest. We might have maybe 2 to 3 days per year where there might be some stress to the cattle. However, if we were to warm 1.5 to definitely by 3 degrees, we would expect to see more days of heat stress for dairy cattle, closer, say, to maybe 17 or 18 days. But as you can see again, there's quite a big spread in the model simulation, so it could be anywhere between 10 and sort of 23 days. Here you can also then go into a bit more depth. If you are a farmer based in Mid-Ulster, you can see how it would compare for your area. Note the colours may change every time you replot this. So actually now Northern Ireland is in blue and Mid-Ulster is shown in red, and we can see that Mid-Ulster on average sees slightly more days of heat stress than the Northern Ireland average, and this continues into the future, and they would potentially have maybe 22 days in an average year in the future. If you want, you can layer up more places on top of that. You can stick more council areas in. You'll start to get quite a lot of colours, so I'd recommend, if you're interested in doing that, maybe only clicking one at a time, because it just turns into a big grey mess a little bit if you put too many lines on. So that is how that can be done. And again, this is then showing, as I say, on the right hand side what this means in terms of milk yield loss per cow per year. So these are not necessarily massive numbers, but you're talking a couple of days milk loss almost entirely, say at the warmest warming level. There's some information below as to what can be done to reduce the risk to dairy cattle. This information's been taken from Farmers Weekly, and you can basically flick through and see some of the suggestions that they offer. This was advice that was offered in England, particularly for housed dairy cattle. Obviously not all herds in Northern Ireland are housed. A lot are out pasture a lot of the time in the fields, in which case there might be slightly different adaptations. Some of the users of this app had suggested, in their experience, trees and large hedgerows provided quite good shading for their livestock. So that's just included down there. But there's, of course, other places in the world will have dealt with this sort of heat stress before. So, this warming that we expect to see, say maybe at 3 degrees or 2 or 3 degrees, might make the climate of Northern Ireland more similar to what is currently experienced in southwest England. So, we can look at what's going on in southwest England or in other parts, say, of Europe, how they are managing to, protect their livestock and reduce the impacts, and maybe learn some lessons from them. And finally, if we go back up, we've got another very similar tab, which is looking at poultry heat stress. This is exactly the same format as what I've just gone through for the dairy cattle. So we've got these two plots, one showing days of potential high risk of heat stress to poultry, which is above 20 degrees Celsius, and the impact this then would have on feed intake in poultry. Again, we've got the different warming levels here, and you can select different council areas depending where you're based. You can compare your area to the Northern Ireland average. So here again we can see areas in the west generally are slightly at higher risk. So for Mana and Oma council area has slightly more days in red of heat stress than the Northern Ireland average, and accordingly that increases the reduction of feed intake in the poultry. So that's again some examples, and we also have again some advice on what you can do to reduce some of the impacts on heat stress on the poultry due to heat stress. I'm sure a lot of this, if you're a poultry farmer, you will already know this, but it does no harm just to see what sort of advice is offered in general by the industry. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour as to what you can find in this app. You potentially have noticed when I've been going through it that every single page has little feedback buttons at the bottom. If you find it useful or unuseful, please do click the buttons to let us know. There's also a feedback form, which is really, really helpful if you want to go into more depth in helping us develop this app further, and similar apps like it. So as I say, all of these pages will have those little buttons at the bottom, so do give them a like. If you want to learn more about the nuts and bolts and the nitty gritty, there is also some information here, and happy to also take inquiries if you need further detail than what is listed there. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to explore this app, to watch this video. I hope it proves useful to you, and do get in touch if you have any questions or want to discuss any of these ideas further.